In this episode with Kevin, I really enjoyed it because he is a podcast host. He's very successful and he's got a great setup and a great microphone. So it was really fun talking to him and really, a good episode overall. And I actually learned a lot from him afterwards about, making my podcast better, which was great. So absolutely loved talking with Kevin. Him and I talked a lot about Genius Zone and being hyper conscious and what that means for you to really be self-aware and what it looks like to be hyper conscious about, a situation, about a relationship, how that ties into leadership, how that ties into self-improvement. And then specifically, we also talked about co-founder roles, how the Genius Zone, how being hyper conscious, all of that ties into co-founder relationships, especially between like a visionary and an integrator, CEO and COO. Really enjoyed this episode and really loved talking to Kevin specifically about, his experience with the Genius Zone and also with his co-founder. How would you describe being hyperconscious?
So the definition of hyperconscious is acutely aware. So number one, the understanding is you're capable of understanding what's going on in your own thought process and then making changes in real time. Yeah. Hyperconsciousness is being able to sit in that and say, okay, what's actually happening here? What is the actual truth? And then trying to make your decisions based on that. And again, I make giant mistakes every single day, just like every other human being. That's just a good analogy or example for it.
Hey everyone, we're here with Kevin. He is the CFO and host of the Next Level University podcast. Thanks for being here with me.
Tyler, I'm excited to chat. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Let's see where we can take this thing.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's always fun talking to a fellow podcaster. I feel like you're just a pro already.
That's what people say. We'll see. You'll know at the end of the episode whether or not I am, but I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah. Well, so first off, so Next Level University podcast, that's your full-time job. So could you go over, what that is, what you guys talk about there?
Yeah, so Next Level University is not only the podcast. So we do 7 episodes a week. We're a global top 100 podcast. We have 1,150 something episodes and listeners in 125 plus countries, which is all amazing. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. But as you know, if you're out there, you have to find a way to make money with your podcast or business. So we have a lot of different things, whether it's one-on-one coaching, group coaching, retreats, live events. Our thing is, if we're not adding value to you, we don't want any money. That really is kind of how we've set up our business. And we also have a very interesting take where we really believe that business should be impact first. If you're not impacting, you're not really creating a sustainable business. So we're based on impact, and that's really the way we've set it up.
Perfect. I love it. And that echoes something that my co-founder and I talk about all the time is we're all about the long term, but then most of all, we're all about like the win-win-win scenario. We have like kind of a dual-sided marketplace with VAs and clients, US clients. So it's kind of a win-win-win. So yeah, no, I love that model. And it's the most sustainable and most fulfilling model, I think.
Yeah. If you can really understand your audience and make sure that you're adding, and I know it sounds so simple, right? It's like, just add more value.
Right.
But we went to a conference one time and they literally said, it was on the projector, business is about making money. And that's how we knew, this probably isn't going to be as valuable as we thought, just because those are misaligned aspirations. And that's okay. Yeah. I love money and I like nice things too, but not at the detriment of adding.
Right. Love it. That's perfect. Well, awesome. So kind of getting into first a little bit of background. So on your LinkedIn, it says you started your career as a weatherization foreman. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, that's when I became quote unquote successful, I would say, in the marketplace. Okay. But long before that, I decided not to go to college. I didn't want to go to college because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew that wasn't it. And honestly, I don't like school. I was never a fan of school. So after high school, all my friends went away to college and I stayed back and I was pumping gas at the gas station. I was a personal trainer. I cleaned floors at a hospital, truck driver, forklift operator, in construction. I did many, many different things, but that was the job that actually allowed me to, I'd say, create a sustainable adult life. It's probably the best way to put it.
Nice. Cool. And then could you just give a brief explanation of what that job is? What does that entail?
Yeah. So as a weatherization technician, it's your job to go into buildings and make them more energy efficient. So we worked predominantly in schools, anything state-owned, schools, fire stations, police stations, libraries. Okay. So we would go into a school, we would have a contract, and it might say, you're going to put weather stripping on these 40 doors. you're going to go into the classrooms and go above the drop ceiling, and you're going to air seal over the windows, and then you're going to, caulk and seal around the windows as well.
Gotcha. Cool. Awesome. So how did you make that switch from that kind of niche job to podcasting into Next Level University?
So I found quote unquote success at 26. I made $100,000 that year. And I remember after I made the money, I had this moment where I thought the money was going to make all the rest of my life really good. I thought I'd feel more confident. I thought I'd feel more aligned, happier, all of it. I thought 100,000 for some reason, that amount is going to cross everything off the list for me. Yeah. And after I made that money, I realized that for most of my life, I had lived unconsciously. And I made my decisions unconsciously. Just, I think this is what's best. So after I made the money, I said, well, what's the opposite of unconscious? Hyperconscious. That's when I started the podcast. And as you and I talked about, it was called the Hyperconscious Podcast in the beginning. But after I did that, I fell out of love with my job and I fell in love with podcasting. And I did not care about my job. I didn't care about the money because I knew that wasn't what I wanted. And it just, the shortest version is it kept getting worse where I was traveling. I was on the road for months at a time. And I ended up getting to the point where I was sitting on the edge of a bed debating suicide because I was so miserable. I was so burnt out. I was so depressed. And the co-founder and the CEO of my company, he was my friend at the time. And I messaged him. And I said, hey, Alan, I'm having these weird thoughts. I'm having these dark thoughts. I feel stuck, hopeless, helpless, trapped. I don't know what to do. Yeah. And he said, I think you need to change your environment. So I ended up leaving my job and then basically doing the startup thing where we already had a podcast, but we had zero results. So then we went to work on how do we make this a business and how do we grow it? So yeah, it was mostly pain. It was pain and feeling like I didn't know what else to do at that point.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. So, I mean, one thing that I'm curious about, so when I heard like the Hyperconscious podcast, like I did resonate with that a little bit, but I think I only would have resonated with that just in this time of my life because right now I feel like I'm experiencing that so currently I'm doing 75 hard, which is like the Andy Frisella kind of challenge where you have all these daily habits. And so like, I feel like, this time of my life, I've been the most conscious. And so like that did resonate with me. I was like, oh, that's actually a good way to describe it. Like I feel most in the moment than I've ever felt before. Is that kind of how you would describe it? Or how would you describe being hyperconscious?
So the definition of hyperconscious is acutely aware. And I was so sad when I found that it was in the dictionary because I was like, that's going to be my thing. I'm going to get that in the dictionary. Yeah. Acutely aware. It means that you understand everything at the deepest levels. This is always my example. I was working out with Alan, who's in very good shape, and one of our other buddies who's not a big gym goer. He doesn't frequent the gym. In the gym, I am 10 out of 10 confident because I've spent years and years and years. The second we transitioned from the workout to talking about business, and this was a few years ago, I got super insecure. In the blink of an eye, it was like I was a different person. Interesting. Then I start villainizing Alan and our buddy because they know more about business than I do. What does that mean about them? What does that mean about me? The fact that I have the awareness to be able to do that in real time and then make my decisions accordingly, I like to think of that as an example of what hyperconsciousness is. You understand everything as deeply as you can, so you're not just winging it. You're not questioning with no answers. At least when you question something, you're getting an answer of why you're acting the way you are. So by definition, in the dictionary, which I wanted to get hyperconscious in, the definition is acutely aware. And my understanding and my story for that is, so number one, the understanding is you're capable of understanding what's going on in your own thought process and then making changes in real time. Yeah. Hyperconsciousness is being able to sit in that and say, okay, what's actually happening here? What is the actual truth? And then trying to make your decisions based on that. And again, I make giant mistakes every single day, just like every other human being. That's just a good analogy or example for it. Yeah.
And so, I mean, another way to put it, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it just being very like introspective? Like you're constantly looking inward of, okay, well, how I'm feeling this way, or, I'm villainizing him, why is that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And so I guess, is there any tips or tricks of like, how do you practice that? Is it all just about like asking questions to yourself all the time? Like, what's the way to do that?
Yeah, I believe asking yourself why is the best thing in the world, because or having somebody else do it for you, because I think as humans, we get to a certain point, we say, I'm not really willing to put in any more effort to understand this at a deeper level. But
Yeah.
if you're with somebody and they say, okay, why did you feel insecure? And then the person says, well, I didn't know enough. Okay, well,
Yeah.
why? Well, I haven't really studied that before. Okay, why? I didn't really ever plan on being a business owner. Okay, why? I never felt like I could. I didn't feel like I was smart enough. Okay, why? You keep
Right.
going. You might eventually get to the point where I now understand at a deep level that because my father wasn't there when I was younger, it built up this complex of me not being good enough, and boom, boom, boom. And that can untether a lot of things in your life. So
Yeah.
you asking yourself why is a great question. Having other people ask you why is a great question. The other thing you can do too is reflect on experience. So Alan calls it an experience review. So the best thing that you and I could do after this interview, Tyler, is you would reflect on it from your awareness. I would reflect on it from my awareness, and I would learn
Yep.
something new. So what did I do in this interview that I thought was really good? What wasn't so good? Okay, cool.
Right.
And then you'd probably do something similar. Obviously, we'd have different answers, but hopefully those answers would allow ourselves to understand ourselves at a deeper level.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. And I think an important aspect of that, I mean, honestly, I think of it, or at least my co-founder and I talk about it like free therapy. Like we go to each other and we kind of, just lay out all of these thoughts and like, hey, here's why I'm feeling this way. It's not always perfect. Like sometimes there are disagreements and sometimes there are hard feelings, but like as long as you create, I think like that safe space to ask those questions, I feel like that's really important because I would not ask those introspective questions with my co-founder if he always attacked me at those moments, right? Like, hey, like I'm experiencing this kind of, struggle or, inner battle. And, if he just attacked me and like, oh, well, yeah, no, I'm better because of this and this and this, like, then I would never go to him and I never, want to figure those things out. So I think creating that safe space, a good relationship with somebody else is important as well.
Yeah, 100%. The level of vulnerability in the relationship determines the quality of the relationship. And
Yeah.
if you feel comfortable being open and honest, if you feel safe, you're more likely than not going to really grow in that relationship. So that makes me very happy to hear the fact that that's the relationship you have with your co-founder, because that's very, very much Alan and I. So I'm very grateful to hear
Yeah.
that.
And it's tough and like I don't know, it's amazing that we found each other and like I'm sure, you guys have been best friends for a while, so like I'm glad you guys have, been able to successfully transition into business and a successful business. But yeah, I know that is, I don't know how rare, but I know that is rare that because you hear stories all the times about kind of founder breakups and founder divorces kind of thing, because it is like a marriage almost where you just have to have this open communication and progressing a relationship.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things you can ask yourself if you're trying to figure out if your business partner, if your life partner, if your friends, whatever, are right for you. So usually there's one of three things that happens that breaks up. I'll say business relationships, but it's usually most of them. It's either core values, core beliefs, or core aspirations in conflict. If Tyler and I are on the same team and your core aspiration is to bring self-improvement to the world, love that. If your core value is putting yourself first and being selfish, that's misaligned. If your core belief is we must take advantage of people to win at business, that's misaligned. We might have the same core aspirations, but the way we get there is drastically different. That's usually why people have the breaks, because you start something and you get a year, 5 years in, and you realize, wait, that's not what we used to talk about. We never used to do it that way. And one of the other things you see very often, the closer you get to somebody, the closer you get to the truth. So if you and I do a 5-minute interview, you're going to get 5 minutes of Kevin. You're probably not going to know me at a very deep level. But if you and I did a 24-hour interview, you'd really get to understand me. I'd get to understand you. And we'd really figure out, do I like Tyler? Does Tyler like me? Would we mesh together? The closer you get to somebody, the closer you get to the truth.
Nice. I love it. Well, yeah, perfect. So, I mean, let's go into fairly related topic of leadership. You've talked about how, you're all about self-improvement, helping other people improve. You guys have lots of different courses. So what are some common failures or common mistakes people make when it comes to being a good leader in their organization and their business?
I think now it's really starting to pivot, I think. And I'm young enough I think I've kind of been part of this because I'm 33, so I don't know what it was like being led 50 years ago. I wasn't around. I wasn't thought of yet. But I think one of the things is a lot of people are leading by words and not by example. And if you're in a startup or you're in a small business, odds are you, whether you're the owner, the CEO, the COO, the CFO, you probably know most of the people working there and or working with you. You saying one thing and doing one different thing, that's a huge break in rapport, and that's one very, very fast way to lose trust. I think people are now understanding that it has to be a very unique balance of results and experience. For a long time, it was get me these results or else.
Right.
Now I think we're starting to understand, well, these are the results that are the expectations. How can I support you to make the experience as valuable as possible? I think that's very, very, very important. And I think the other thing, too, that's starting to switch is people are now seeing that just because you're the employee does not mean you should get the short end of the stick. It doesn't mean that I am employing you and I'm giving you a job, therefore you must do all this, and it doesn't really matter if you're happy or not. I think it's starting to kind of meet in the middle where it's a symbiotic win-win. And you said this earlier, a win-win relationship. For a long time, it wasn't necessarily that way, other than you have benefits and this is how much we pay you. I think there's room to move it towards the middle now, which I think is happening.
Yeah, no, and definitely. Yeah, I agree with that. It's exciting. And so with that, like, I mean, with kind of knowing what to do as a leader, I think it's also important to, again, kind of asking questions of who you are and, you know, what you enjoy and what you're working towards, your aspirations. You mentioned earlier about, you know, you're probably, I would say, considered the founder of Next Level University, but not necessarily the CEO. And I feel like most people think, oh, that's, you know, hand in hand. Like if you're the founder, you're going to be the CEO. So how did that work for you? How did you decide, you know, I'm not going to be the CEO. That's not who I am?
Yeah, that's a great question. Alan and I had worked together for a couple of years, I think, before we really said, all right, we're going to go make this a business and we're going to do everything. We're going to do the filing. We're going to be legit. And we started talking about, and Alan brought this to me because Alan understands business. He said, well, Kev, we have to have officers. Like we're going to have a CEO. We're going to have to see a CFO, COO. Yeah. And I remember at the beginning, I was like, what does that even mean? I don't even know what any of this means. I've never been in corporate America. I've never been in a startup or a company like that. Then he and I started talking about it, and I said, well, you have to be the CEO. I don't know what we're doing. I have no clue where we're going to be in 50 years. Like, that's you. You're the vision. And you said that earlier, too. Like, you're the visionary. You're the one who is creating the systems. You're the one who is charting the course. I'm a really good operator. I'm good at showing up every day and knocking down dominoes. I couldn't tell you what dominoes to knock down, though. So I had this belief, Tyler, and I still do to this day, that it would be doing the business, it would be doing myself, it would be doing the team and all of our families a disservice if I was the one in charge, because I think Alan is bred for that, where I'm the CFO because I'm very focused on money and I'm very consistent. I am in the finances every single day, 7 days a week, trying to figure out what's going on. So yeah, it's just, to our original point, it's self-awareness.
Hey everyone, in this quick break, I wanted to give a shout out to Coconut VA. They are making this podcast possible. This podcast is hosted by me, but a lot of the back-end work is actually done by a Coconut VA. I'm the co-founder of Coconut VA, and we find Filipino virtual assistants for US companies. So if you've got a proven business model, you're growing, you need help with operations, general admin, lead generation, or really any help around the business, you could probably hire a Coconut VA. You can find a link on my podcast page, thebtspodcast.com, or at coconutva.com. My podcast is a great example of how Coconut VA could help you. I've done the work to systematize my podcast, systematize the production process, and now I can bring in a Coconut VA to actually execute that process. If you're ready to delegate tasks, you're ready to hire a Coconut VA.
It's me trying to be hyper-conscious enough to say, okay, why do I need CEO on my metaphorical door? Why do I need that? Because it feels good and people introduce me or look at me differently? No, I want what's best for this business and for the world, and me being in charge in that way probably isn't it. So I want to be humble in that understanding.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I applaud you for that, because it does require humility, I would say, because like you said, in the public eye, public perception, you know, the CEO is a step above, right, than anybody else in the C-suite. And like they're compensated like that, you know, usually in large companies. But I do feel like there's differences in the size of the company, right? So like you guys compared to a Fortune 500 company, right? And I think, I don't know for sure, but I think one thing I want to do in the future is kind of restructure that. Like, what should these roles be called? So like one thing I've heard about is Chief Visionary Officer. And like, so I'm a big proponent of rocket fuel, like visionary integrator type mentality. And so, great partnerships are made up of these visionaries and these integrators. And I feel like both of them should be equal co-founders because they both have these, superpowers, right, of visionary skill and integrator skill. And they should be, like I said, equal and like equally yoked, in the business and making the same amount of progress. So what do you think about that? Do you feel like you're still, an equal co-founder with Alan? Like, I'm sure you do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, legally, I'm 51% owner and Alan is 49% owner. In terms of everything else, it's just that way Alan said this to me. He said, I always want you to have the final decision. And even then I said, does it have to be that or should we do 50-50? He said, I always want you to have the final say legally. And I said, all right, I appreciate that very much. I'm going to take the money and run in 20 years. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
No, the thing is, we both work as hard, but in different ways.
Yeah,
so
totally.
we're at the stage now where we're just really, really getting started. And there is a lot of sweat equity that still has to go into, so much sweat equity that has to go into this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like Alan is world class at the things he does. I'm really good at the stuff I do. He goes and does his thing. I go and do my thing. And then we meet and we say, okay, what's happening? It's very much a 50-50 where I believe he knows what's best in these arenas. We both believe I know what's best in other arenas. And we make sure that we're giving each other the space that we need to give each other. We had a conversation last night on a team call. And he said, I'm very grateful, Kev, that you gave me the permission to just be the guy who makes the decisions for the long term. And I said, I just want us to win. That's what I want.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And you guys, yeah, prime example. And I think I will say, just as a caveat, like I totally agree with the decision to do 51%. Like, I don't think anybody should ever be 50-50 because that leads to all sorts of issues. Like, one of you should, and in my opinion, typically I think it is kind of more the visionary that should have that because they have more of the long-term, vision for the company, and that makes more sense. Like, at the end of the day, they should probably be the one to veto, any decision. But however you structure it, yeah, there shouldn't be any of that, potential for deadlock.
Well, I agree with
awesome.
you. I agree with you, though. I do agree that I just think for him, he understood that I needed the certainty. That early in the journey, we weren't making any money. I'm broke. I don't even know what we're doing, really. So, yeah, he's a very unique specimen when it comes to that, and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to have a wonderful business partner who is so logical and just hardcore decision-making, but he also understands that I'm not that way, and we've really... He's helped me understand business and money and numbers, and I've helped him understand emotional intelligence and the human experience. So to your point earlier, it's a very, very good mix of humans.
Yeah. I love it. Awesome. Well, perfect. So the last thing I'd like to talk about, you briefly mentioned earlier something about the genius zone. Could you kind of describe that, define that?
Yeah. The genius zone is... I think of it kind of as like 3 layers, but the genius zone is the thing that you are the best at, that nobody really can compete with you, but you also have to make sure that that's what you're doing the vast majority of your time. So this is a good example. Somebody the other day asked, hey, I was on their podcast. They said, will you come back on with Alan? And I said, Alan doesn't do interviews. Alan, his genius zone is coaching, building the business, or setting up systems. That's what Alan is doing right now. I think he's on a coaching call. If he's not, he's behind the scenes working on the systems. Where for me, I do 20 to 25 podcast episodes a week, where I love it. Now, here's the thing. If Tyler said, hey, Kev, I'll give you X amount of dollars to paint 25 paintings this week. Can't do it. It's not my genius zone. I suck. Not good. But I can do the podcast because that's my genius zone. That's what comes easier to me. That's where I lose track of time. That's where the most amount of my potential is. So your genius zone is something that comes easier to you. It's something that you want to be known for. It's where your real actual potential lies. There's a bunch of movies out there of people who are like, I'm trying out for the hockey team, I'm trying out for the basketball team for the 25th year in a row, and they've never made it, where if they just did the thing that they were supposed to be doing, they could be really, really, really good at that. I think that's an overarching example of the genius zone.
Interesting. And so is there a mix? I mean, I could be super passionate about, cooking or whatever, but maybe I suck at it, but that feels like my genius zone. Do you feel like there needs to be a mix of like, you're also a little bit good at it too?
I think it's important, but I also do think if you're passionate about it, and again, it is a fine line. It's very specific. If you're passionate about something, it's easier to get better at it. If you hate something,
Sure.
so there's two ends. You could be really good at something that you hate. You're probably not going to succeed in the long run, or your inner game is going to be torn apart while you do it. But there's also the other side of that where you might really love something but kind of suck. It depends. I do think you have to have some sort of talent, because if not, it's going to be very hard to maximize your potential, then create impact through that potential, and then actually be able to turn a profit on that. So yeah, you have to be good enough to at least monetize in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, perfect. And so tying it back into what we were just discussing with kind of the co-founder relationship, what would you say? Well, first off, has there ever been like a temptation for you to kind of compare yourself to Alan? Like Alan's great at, coaching. I'm not so great. Has that ever been hard for you to compare, avoid comparisons?
Yeah, that was the first maybe 3 years where I thought I had to be Alan. I thought everything I did had to be the same exact way that Alan did it, or I was doing it wrong. And I read a book recently. Alan recommended it to me. It's called The Hidden Habit of Genius, or The Hidden Habits of Genius. And I understand now at a pretty deep level that Alan is a genius in his own way. There are things that he is capable of that I just am not. And I'm not saying that to beat myself up. I'm saying that because he's intellectually, what he has, his capabilities are just higher.
Right.
For a long time, I would beat myself up because I didn't want to work 16 hours a day every day. And I felt guilty being done at 7 o'clock at night after getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. For a long time, I thought I had to be that. Now I realize that my specialty is, number one, making sure we never lose relatability to our audience. Alan's the least relatable human maybe on the planet, so we're not going to win that way. So yes, to your point, at one point, I really thought to myself, I must be exactly like this human if we're going to succeed. Then that shifted to, I don't want to be anything like this human. Then that shifted to somewhere in the middle of, I need to take the success principles that he practices, but I need to put them into practice in my own unique way and make sure I'm in alignment with what I want so I can be fulfilled and successful. And that's a very important understanding for me.
I love it. Perfect. Well, so actually one more question came up, and this might be a tough one, and if you don't have a perfect answer to it, that's fine. But how did you guys navigate because like you said, Alan is maybe the more business savvy guy, maybe has some more experience. How did you decide that, you will be equal co-founders in the business? And like you said, 51, 49 percentages. How did you decide that that would be equal? Because like in some ways you could argue that, the CEO role should be compensated more, should have a higher percentage of equity. How did you guys come to terms with that?
It was just honest conversation. It's humility. I really think it's humility. I understand that 50% of what we're going to create is way more than 100% of what I was going to create myself. But not even close. I mean,
Definitely.
I was doing really well at $100,000 a year. I wasn't going to get much higher than that. I believe Alan also he doesn't care about the money. That's number one. He has no desire, doesn't care, to a detriment. He doesn't care about the money. So I believe that when we started this, and it's going to sound weird, but we saw in each other what we were missing in ourselves. And we understand at a deep level that together, it's way more than 100%. So it doesn't even really matter. It doesn't really matter. And the other thing too is, in the very beginning, I took a lot of risk. I mean, in order to really get this up and running, I was like $35,000 in credit card debt. I was fronting a lot of what we were doing. Yeah. And then there's been times where Alan has fronted it. So we just have a very honest, real relationship that is based on, look, if things ever change, let's just be honest. We're best friends. Like, let's remember that. Let's get rid of the ego. If things change, we have to talk about it. So that was really what it was, is at some point, Alan's going to be out consulting and making however much money. Maybe that won't go directly into the business and I won't be entitled to some of that.
Right.
We're going to cross that bridge when we get there. So yeah, it's hard. It's a hard answer, but a lot of it is just, that's kind of who we are as friends. And that's what our relationship looks like.
Perfect. Well, this has been awesome. Yeah, really appreciate it, Kevin.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to kind of wrap things up, definitely go listen to Next Level University, listen into Kevin's podcast. And yeah, again, thank you for being here with me.
My pleasure, Tyler. Great questions, great conversation. I appreciate you, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to Behind the Startup. If you like the show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a review.